All right, well, good morning, Open Door Ministries, and to all our friends and family on Facebook and YouTube. It is great to be back sharing the Word of God with you again today. We are continuing with our series on hot button church issues. We're going to talk about religious freedom today, religious freedom and religious persecution. That seems to be a topic that if you are an evangelical or a fundamentalist, you hear a lot about. So we're going to talk about that. Does the Constitution really say what we think it is? And I would kind of propose to you that most people have no idea what's actually in the Constitution, right? Quickly, just, somebody tell me, what's your Third Amendment right? Okay, so I have several people who have said freedom from religion. That is not your Third Amendment right. Your Third Amendment right is not to quarter soldiers in your home, okay? But, everybody's like, oh, well, First Amendment, they may talk about the Second Amendment, they may talk about the Fourth Amendment, but very few of them ever talk about the Third Amendment. And I'm just glad I'm not, quartering soldiers in my home. But that's that's kind of the point that I'm making, is that when it comes to the Constitution, a lot of us know sort of about it or what we've been told it says, but very few of us actually know what it is, unless you're a political scientist or probably a philosophy instructor who knows that kind of stuff. So religious freedom and religious persecution. All right, everybody ready? I'm going to tell you what the Bible says about religious freedom. Everybody ready? There you go. I searched the whole Bible. There it is. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is not one verse in the Bible that talks about religious freedom. Not one. Zero. Zip. Nada. All right. What we do have instead is that when the Bible speaks of freedom, and it does speak of freedom, when the Bible speaks of freedom, it's about freedom from the works of the law and freedom from sin. And it's important that you notice that's the works of the law. All those little religious do's and don'ts about keeping yourself pure, things like the kosher laws, things like circumcision, those are the works of the law. From those, we have freedom. And also freedom from sin. We once were bound and captive to sin. We could do no other, yet Jesus empowered us. He broke the power of sin and has empowered us to live lives without sin. He has shown us the way to live without sin. And so when the Bible talks about freedom, that's what it talks about. Nowhere in there will you find freedom of religion. So where do we get freedom of religion? Well, it's kind of a unique American kind of creation kind of thing. I did see one scholar, he was trying to say, well, the early Christians taught about freedom of religion. One of our early Christian fathers, Tertullian, spoke of religion. And he put a little quote in there, and as I'm reading it, I'm like going, okay, this kind of sounds like Tertullian, but I don't think he would actually say something like this. And when I check the quote, I go back to the original historical document. Guess what? He took it out of context. And it's like, whoops. It says exactly the opposite of what this guy wants. And I'm like going, that's not good scholarship. All right. Here's an example of what the Bible talks about freedom. Galatians 5:13. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. Paul is telling the Galatians, yes, you don't have to keep all of those works of the law, but don't get too crazy and think you can do whatever you want. Don't suddenly give into your flesh. That's not what this is about. Freedom is not about you can sin and do whatever you want. You don't have to worry about it. Instead, it's about you've been freed from the works of the law. James Madison, one of our founding fathers of the United States, kind of known as the father of the Constitution, he originally began writing about religious freedom in a document called the Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, and that was probably somewhere around June of 1785. What was happening is that one of the colonies had noticed that churches and church attendance had begun to decline. Fewer and fewer people were going to churches. And so a lot of these churches, which are dependent upon donations, needed money. And so that particular colony said, here's what we'll do. We'll tax people's property, and we'll give that money to the church. Because we need churches. Churches help, promote morality and being good citizens and all those kind of things. So we do need churches. So we'll just tax everybody's property, and we'll give that money to the church. And James Madison was opposed to this tax. And this is what he said. Who does not see that the same authority which can establish Christianity in exclusion of all other religions may establish with the same ease any particular sect of Christians in exclusion of all other sects? That the same authority which can force a citizen to contribute 3 pence only of his property for the support of any one establishment may force him to conform to any other establishment in all cases whatsoever. In other words, if we do this, if we tax property and give it to one particular church within our particular commonwealth, who's to say that the government won't then decide that that's the only kind of church that deserves to be around and all the other ones don't count? See, getting our government involved in our religion is bad practice, because then whoever controls the government can decide which religion is valid and which one is not. Do we really want that? And Madison would say no. All right, so talking about the Bill of Rights, where do we get our religious freedom? It's in the First Amendment. That's part of your First Amendment rights, along with the freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's part of it, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's the other part of it. So Congress is not supposed to establish any one religion over another, nor are they to prohibit you from how you exercise your religion. So for example, the government cannot come into this church and say, you know, you guys are doing little sprinkle baptisms here. It's got to be full immersion or nothing. They can't tell me how to run the church. They can't tell any of us how to run the church. That's why when you get one of those fear-mongering letters from somebody trying to raise money, claiming that the government's going to come in and force churches to perform same-sex marriages, it's a lie. Because they can't. It's prohibited. How we exercise our religion. If we decide that's not something we want to do, they can't force us, no matter what the fundraisers say. Or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's the First Amendment there. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So they can't establish a religion, nor can they prohibit you from how you exercise your religion. Now, as I mentioned last week, talking about the roots of the evangelical movement, and I do want to make sure that you understand evangelicals are a socio-political movement. Okay? I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about a system. I'm talking about a social political movement. People like Falwell Jones, Wyrick, built it upon segregation. And that was, of course, the Green versus Kennedy, Green versus Connolly issue. That was about segregationist schools. And the argument was that how we run our schools is part of our religious freedom to exercise our faith. So if we say no black people can attend our school, we're just exercising our religious freedom. You can't come in and tell us how to run our schools. They're part of our ministry. They're part of our church. And so the government is encroaching. Anybody buy this argument? Well, the government didn't buy it either, because what they said was segregationist schools are not charitable institutions. If you are not serving everyone, you can't consider yourself a charity. You're not a charitable institution. That's what the court said. At issue, and this was the issue, was tax-exempt status. These segregationist schools had tax-exempt status, which means that they didn't have to pay taxes on their property or any profit that they made by charging tuition to go to these schools. So it comes down to money, because it always comes down to money sometimes. It comes down to money. And that's what they were fighting for. We don't want to have to pay these taxes. I think that when ministries begin crossing the lines over into businesses, we have to be very careful. Because sometimes, as ministries grow, the financial needs of that ministry grow, and they begin looking at other ways to make money, and they begin turning into businesses, and the business interests and the creation of money becomes more important than the ministry that they're doing. This was about segregation and wanting to have their cake and eat it too. We want to be a segregationist, which has nothing to do with ministry, but we also want our tax-exempt status by claiming we're a religious charitable institution. This is kind of the beginning of the culture wars. And I'm sure if you've been connected to the evangelicals and if you've been connected to the fundamentalists, fundagelicals as I refer to them, You've heard of the culture wars. We're in a culture war. They're trying to wipe out our Christian culture. But this is sort of the beginning of it. As we began to get more politically active, as the evangelicals got more active and involved in government, trying to influence government for their own benefit. But then this raises the question, what is and is not an exercise of your faith? For example, let us suppose that I want to get together a group of guys and we want to play poker. And we decide, hey, we're all not working on Sunday. So let's get together every Sunday and we'll play poker. And wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if, because we buy lunch and we buy chips and we buy dips and we buy all that kind of stuff, if we could pool our money, but get a tax write-off for that? Wouldn't it be great if the money we spend for sandwiches and chips and dips, we got some kind of tax? So we'll just declare ourselves the first church of 7-card stud. We'll be the first church of 7-card stud. And we meet on Sunday already. How cool is that? So we'll just call our Sunday gatherings, a religious service. And that way we can write off all our taxes and stuff. Maybe we can get donations and people can donate. We can buy cards and chips and a nicer poker and all this kind of stuff. Is that truly an exercise of faith? And if that is, then why isn't everybody doing it? Trust me, there are some sketchy outfits out there who walk that fine line between we're a religious institution and we're a social club. And there are people who are like, yeah, my house is a church and we all get together and we sing a few songs and stuff like that. And they try to then have people donate money for their parties. But there's all kinds of rules about that. We've had to put all kinds of rules in place. Rules about what's called inurement, that you can't use the money given to the church for your own personal benefit. And whether or not you're allowed, what you're allowed to do and what you're not, that's a real sticky gray area. You have to be really careful about that. But what is an exercise of faith? If I get together, say a dozen of my stoner friends, and we sit in a building with pews and smoke pot, is that an exercise of my faith? If I just say this is a tenet of my religion, that we all get high, what if I want to drop LSD? Can that be a tenet of my religion? See, what is and what is not an exercise of your faith? And the big question then is, who determines that? Who determines that? And believe it or not, the institution that grants this tax-exempt status, this institution that decides whether or not you are a non-profit charity is, of course, the government. And they're going to put down the rules because they're the ones granting the status. Now, for the rest of us who are Christians, we're like, well, yeah, we know how to practice our faith. I don't need the government to tell me how to do that. But if you want to be a nonprofit, if you want to have tax-exempt status, then you have to follow the rules of the entity that grants you that status. And so immediately, whether you like it or not, you got the government involved in religion. Or you could just be a church and not worry about that, and the government will stay completely out of it. Of course, nobody gets a tax write-off, but that's the price you pay. Persecution. How many times have we heard, I'm being persecuted? It seems like every time I turn around, some evangelical is yelling persecution about something. Some Disney movie has upset somebody, and so they decide they're going to boycott Disney because their religious beliefs are being persecuted. One of the best examples we had happened in 1962. The U.S. Supreme Court banned school-sponsored prayer in public schools in a 1962 decision, saying that it violated the First Amendment, free speech, establishment clause as well. But students are allowed to meet and pray on school grounds as long as they do it so privately and don't try to force others to do the same. I have been hearing about this and this decision since the late 60s. I can remember as a child growing up, and in those days they had little mimeographs, those little dittos that they used to hand out all over the place. And they would complain, oh, they've kicked God out of school. It's like they didn't kick God out of school. They just said you can't have teachers leading prayer in school because it violates this establishment clause, because they were leading Christian prayers in school. See, I'll tell you what, you get a whole bunch of fundagelicals together and you say, okay, you know what? You can have teacher-led prayer in school. Monday morning, we'll do the old Regent's Prayer like we used to do back in the 1960s, a Christian prayer, and all the teachers will lead it. But Tuesday morning, we're going to do a Jewish prayer. And Wednesday morning, we're going to do a Muslim prayer. And Thursday morning, we're going to do a Hindu prayer. And Friday morning, we're going to do a Satanist prayer. That way, we don't establish one religion over the other. Guess how fast prayer would be out of school? See, the issue isn't we want prayer in school, it's we want Christian prayer in school. We want preeminence. We don't want to acknowledge any other religion. Is that persecution? Are we persecuting Christians by not allowing them preeminence over other religions? Now, if you're an evangelical, or a fundamentalist, or a fundagelical, guess what? You would say, yes, this is persecution. They're persecuting Christians by not allowing us to be preeminent. You say, well, how can you think that way? That doesn't make any sense to me. And they'll tell you, well, it's because we're a Christian nation. See, this is part of the mythology of fundagelicals, that this country was established as a Christian nation. That all the founders were Christian, that they got their ideas from the Constitution, from the Bible, and that the entire intent and goal of all our founding fathers was to establish a Christian nation. And they'll take some historical documents here and there and some writings here and there, and they'll take them out of context, and they'll try to build their case for you. The Christian nationalist argument is that since we were established as a Christian nation, only Christianity should be allowed. No other religions. See, it was meant to be freedom for Christians, not other religions. Freedom for Christians. So when the Constitution talks about, freedom of religion, it's only for Christians. You have some people like David Barton, who writes really bad history books full of myths and lies, misrepresentations. You have scholars, supposed scholars like David Barton, who will tell you things like, well, only Christians should be allowed to hold office and be in the government. And he perpetrates this whole Christian nation myth. I can remember being in high school when one of his first books came out, and a couple of my history instructors, and these were good Christian men, said, you know what, this is all mythology, this isn't real. And back then, they recognized it. Now we don't seem to recognize it anymore because the mythology has been told over and over again. The lie has been perpetrated over and over again that we can't tell truth from lie anymore. Samuel Huntington, one of these Christian nationalists, also a white nationalist, would have this to say: America is defined by its Anglo-Protestant past. Stop and look at those words, Anglo-Protestant. Anglo means what? White. Anglo-Saxons, white. Protestant, non-Catholic, non-Orthodox individuals. So not only are they anti-other religions, they're anti-Catholic, anti-Orthodox. Anglo-Protestants, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, WASP. We're supposed to be a WASPy nation. And if we lose that, then we lose our identity. That's who America is. You want to be an American? You got to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Does that sound slightly racist to you? Sounds a little racist to me. Let me do a quick check with you. When I say somebody is an American, most of you will think of a white person. You ever notice a white person has never had to say, oh, well, I'm a white American? We have to say, I'm an Afro-American American. I'm an Asian American. I'm a Latino American. Why do we have to say that? Why do I never have to say I'm a white American? Because we just naturally assume that if I'm white, I must be an American. Usually you can pick out the Americans. We're wearing blue jeans and we're really loud. Sorry. Okay. But my point again, Anglo-Protestant, that will lose our identity and our freedom if we do not preserve our cultural inheritance. And that's the scare part of it. Well, these other groups will come in. The blacks will take over. And then they'll oppress the white people like we oppressed them. The Asians will take over. And they will oppress the white people like we oppressed them and exploited their labor. The Latinos will take over. We'll lose our freedom. That's the scare part. And I'm going to say something very important to you. And if you pick up only one thing from this message, I hope you get this. Anytime people start throwing out statements and you begin to experience anger or fear, you're being manipulated. If they say something and it provokes anger or fear in you, it's because they're trying to manipulate you. They're trying to get you to make an emotional decision rather than making a rational one. Oh, your brain will come up with a reason later. We'll rationalize it later. But you'll make that emotional decision and your brain will figure out how to support it later. But be careful. When your first response is fear or anger, you're being manipulated. Persecution. If you are allowed to your exercise of Christianity freely, can other religions do the same? If you're allowed to exercise Christianity freely, can other religions do the same? That's a big question. I would say most of the people in this room would probably say, well, yes. If you're evangelical, the answer is no. We're a Christian nation. We can't allow our enemy to have a foothold in our nation. Those demonic religions, they're all fake. They're led by demons. They lead people astray. They make people go to hell. We can't have them at all. That's always one of the big questions. That's a statue of Bahamut. It's used by the Satanic Church. And they oftentimes will bring these statues out to different places. The particular issue in this particular picture here is that the 10 Commandments were being displayed at the courthouse steps, and the 10 Commandments were considered a religious monument. Does that establish one religion over the other? They say, well, if you put that one up, how about putting this one up? No! You can't do that! Well, then let's remove all religious monuments. No! We want the 10 Commandments there. See, it either goes one way or it goes the other way. Either everybody's included or nobody. The most reasonable people will say that makes sense. But those who are like, no, there's only one true religion, all the rest of them, demonic, are fighting for preeminence for one. They're not fighting for religious freedom. They're fighting for religious preeminence. I think it's funny. If you come down here to Open Door, did y'all check out Stanton's windows? Did y'all stop and see Stanton's windows? Now the mall, he does a great job. It's an awesome job, right? And they are very eye-catching. People stop by and look at our windows all the time. He does a great job. Now the mall has a policy. We're not really supposed to do religious windows. We're not supposed, but the mall never says anything to us about it. And I think it's because we acknowledge all the holidays. On one window, we have a beautiful, right, nativity set. People stop by and see it. They love it. It's kind of this retro nativity set that's up there. It's beautiful. He does a beautiful job when he's not sneaking Santa Claus in. I know some of you like to see that in there, just like you like to see when he sneaks Darth Vader in, or the T-Rex hidden behind the creche. Okay, right? We had to take all that stuff out. It's like, Stanton, stop it. That goes in the other window. Right, in our other window, what's over there? We got Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, right? We have an Advent over there. We have Festivus. Because we don't think we have to be a bunch of jerks and not acknowledge that people are different from us. And they may have different thoughts. And that we can actually wish them happy holidays or happy Hanukkah and not offend anybody. We don't have to stomp our feet and throw ourselves on the ground and throw a little fit and say, well, no, everybody should be wishing me a Merry Christmas. And the fact that they say happy holidays, that's persecution. They're persecuting me because they're declaring war on Christmas because they won't say Merry Christmas. Or being stupid and going into Starbucks and telling them, my name is Merry Christmas. So they have to call out Merry Christmas when they call your drink. Knock it off. That's childish. Nobody is forbidding anybody from saying Merry Christmas. It's never been illegal to say Merry Christmas. People say happy holidays merely to acknowledge that not everybody celebrates Christmas. Is it persecution when there are legal issues about bakeries making cakes for same-sex weddings, florists who won't do the floral arrangements for same-sex weddings, marriage licenses when the person who's supposed to issue the license refuses to issue the license? Because they're all Christians. I can't bake a cake for a same-sex wedding because I'm a Christian. I can't do flowers for a same-sex wedding because I'm a Christian. I can't issue this marriage license because I'm a Christian. And they end up getting sued. They say, well, that's persecution. You're preventing me from exercising my faith. Is that true? See, we tend to oversimplify a lot of these court cases for fundraising letters and to make our point. But they're more complicated than you think. For example, let us suppose that here at Open Door Ministry, we were holding weddings here, and as part of the services of the weddings, we can include a cake for you. Maybe you want to have a little cake, and we'll do that for you. We'll charge you for it, and we'll do that for you. Is that a ministry? Is that a ministry? Now, I would contend with you that as long as it's only Christians that we allow to get married here, and we're only providing them that service, and we're not charging them for it, but they're donating as a thank you for the service that we give them, then you have a ministry. But see, the moment that you step that out into a business, the moment that you go and you get your business license to operate within that city or county or state, when you start having to pay taxes on your payroll, see, now you're not a ministry, you're a business. There's a difference. And part of getting that business license, part of operating a business within the state, is you have to follow the rules of that entity that issued you that license, or that state who allows you to run your business there. You're no longer a ministry, you're not taking donations. You've never walked into a ministry, you've never walked into a bakery, and you go, I'd like to have that cupcake, and they go, well, it's a suggested donation of $1. Are you a Christian? Shall we pray over your cupcake for you? That's an additional donation of 25 cents for us to bless your cupcake. See, that's never happened. They're running businesses. I can guarantee you, if a man and a woman walk in to one of these bakeries and they order a wedding cake, you're never going to have a Christian inquisition about, well, were you married before? Because the Bible clearly says, if you divorced, except for one of these reasons, your marriage is invalid, so I can't make you a cake. They're never going to stop and ask them, well, are you both virgins? Because my Christian faith says no sex before marriage. And so unless you have, repented of that, and I know that you have, I can't make this cake for you. They're not going to ask. They're going to make a cake and they're going to sell a cake. It's only all of a sudden when it's obvious that it's two women or two men that they're like, oh, I can't do that. It's like it doesn't matter any other time, but only when it becomes really obvious. Suddenly Christianity kicks in. This is part of that manufactured culture wars. Florists, same issue. Marriage licenses, now we're getting someplace else. See, the question is, does the exercise of my religion extend to the public square? See, as long as I'm within my church and how we do things here at the church, government's not going to say anything about it. You will never see a government official come in here and say, you can't sing that song. You'll never see a government official come into this church and say, you can't preach that sermon. There'll never be a government official that will come in here and tell you which translation of the Bible you can read. I'm sorry, it's King James only. That's never going to happen. Because how we practice our religion here is fine with them. Because we're a ministry. And we're doing it here. You all came here voluntarily. Except for Travis, because Teresa dragged her down here. Or was it the other way around? I think Travis dragged Teresa down here. Right? We're doing ministry here, and so the government doesn't care. But what about the public square? I'm not talking about things like praying over your meal in a restaurant. The government has no problem with that. Restaurants don't have any problem with that. I'm talking about things like businesses and governmental offices. See, if you're running a business, not a church, not a ministry, and several times I've had to warn some of the pastors that I've worked with about being very careful about mixing this. At one of the churches that I was associate pastor at, senior pastor, and all these other people are like, well, we have people who want to rent our facilities for this or that or something else. They want to have a birthday party, they want to have an anniversary, they want to hold a wedding here. I'm like, first off, we don't rent anything. If they want to donate, that's fine. But if you rent, now you're a business. See, if you're charging somebody to use your facilities, now you're a business. And if you're a business, then we have to be non-discriminatory, which means that anybody, if we rent it to these people who are outside of our church and we don't do background checks on them to make sure they match up to all our Christian checklist, well, then we have to be non-discriminatory to everybody. Because as soon as somebody comes in and we say, no, you can't do it because X, Y, or Z, now we got problems. Because we're renting our facility. We've become like a business. Same thing with a lot of churches who run preschools. If you're not doing some kind of background check, or if you're not just exclusively serving the Christian community within your preschool, now you're a business. You have to be non-discriminatory. Governmental offices, if you were elected to a certain office, like you're the head of the Marriage License Bureau, you have to serve everybody. Those are tax dollars being used. They're taken from everybody. So the government is non-discriminatory. They should serve everybody. But my Christian faith, well, maybe you shouldn't have taken this office if it conflicts. How far does our exercise of religion extend? Does it extend to a private school that can segregate out black people? The government's already said no. Does it extend to the fact that you are a government official, not a minister, a government official, and you can deny marriage licenses? And the answer is no. When it comes to businesses and governments, that is an issue of this world, not an issue of the church. Now we're talking business and government, we're not talking ministry. But we keep blurring those lines. People are talking about, well, what about that wedding venue? That same-sex couple wanted to go in there and they got sued. That's because that wedding venue, they were claiming, well, this is our ministry, but they were letting everybody else come in and rent the facility. Not just, they weren't a church, they weren't a nonprofit, they were a business, they held a business license. But it's our ministry. No, that's why you have a business license. If it was your ministry, you'd have a nonprofit status. See the difference? How do we relate Caesar and Christ, government and the church? How do these relate together? There's an interesting passage of how Jesus answered this question. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. Jesus was not popular amongst the religious because Jesus brought freedom. And they sent their disciples to tell him, along with the Herodians. Now the Herodians were Jewish leaders who supported the government. So within the church, you had those who were supporters of the government, and you had the zealots who were, let's overthrow the government. So we're going to stick Jesus. We're going to trap him between these two groups, between the Herodians and the zealots. If he picks one side, half the crowd will turn against him. If he picks the other side, the other half of the crowd will turn against him. We got him this time. We're going to make him look bad, right? You know, kind of how we do on all of our news programs nowadays. Let's see if we can nail the president down on an answer so half the population hates him. Along with the Herodians saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think." Talk about buttering him up, huh? Oh, we know you'll give a real answer. You're not going to give a safe political answer. Tell us what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Great question. Because the zealots are like, we shouldn't support this government that we don't agree with. They're using all our money to do all kinds of things that we think they shouldn't do, so we're not going to give them taxes. That's the zealots. The Herodians are like, well, we need to pay taxes because we support the government. So should we do it or not? Should we pay our taxes or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said, Caesar's. And they said to him, therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. What was the point that Jesus was making? See, culture wars are not new. We don't support the government. They're oppressing us. Yes, the Jewish people, the children of Israel, have been an oppressed minority for millennia. They have gone through the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. They've been through some of the worst persecution you can imagine. During World War II, the Holocaust. They lost their homeland. They were dispersed throughout the world. It wasn't until 1948 that they even got land of their own that they can say, this is ours. They've been a persecuted minority. Culture wars are not new. Every Jewish person can stand up and say, we're being persecuted, we don't support this government, they're trying to exterminate us. And it's true. But at the same point, other groups are like, those Jewish people, if they get in control, they'll destroy our way of life. Culture wars are not new. Fights between the government and religion. Jesus indicates that religion isn't an excuse. You cannot use your religion, you cannot use your faith, you cannot use your beliefs to avoid your duty to the state or to avoid your duty to God. See, some people would avoid their duty to the state. I'm not paying taxes. I don't think that my money should go to the government because I'm a Christian and they support things that are not Christian. I don't support this president. I don't support that president. I don't support these laws. I don't support this. I don't support that. Do you need to pay your taxes? Yes. Your Christian faith doesn't excuse you from paying your taxes. Render to Caesar what's his. Nor does it allow you to avoid your duty to God, because it can go that other way too. Right? Well, the state says this, so I can't do this or that. When are you allowed to disobey? Now, growing up and being a youth pastor, this was always the question on every teenager's mind. When can I disobey? When am I allowed to disobey and not get in trouble with God? If there's a conflict between church and state, between the government and Christ, between Caesar and Christ, when do I disobey? Well, think about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Or, using the names the oppressors gave them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When did they disobey? When did they disobey? When they told they could not exercise their religion. When they were told they had to pray to an idol. And what happened? They were thrown in the fiery furnace for it. Think about Daniel. When did he choose to disobey? When he's told he couldn't pray. You're not allowed to pray. He could not exercise his religion. What happened? Thrown in the lion's den. Think about Peter and John before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin had Peter and John arrested. Now, in Jesus' time, in the Roman Empire, the Jewish people had their own courts and their own little police force. And they had them arrested for disturbing the peace. But Peter and John, they were told, do not preach Jesus anymore. You're not allowed to preach Jesus anymore. You can't do that. But Peter and John answered them, whether it is right in God's sight to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. They chose to keep doing it. They were beaten for it. Peter would be imprisoned and beaten on several occasions because he chose to disobey the civil authority above him. Are you seeing a pattern here? That when we disobey, what happens? We also suffer the consequences. Think about Paul, arrested for causing a public disturbance. That's in Acts chapter 16. Paul is actually arrested 3 different times. He's arrested for causing a public disturbance in Acts chapter 16. He's beaten and imprisoned for that. He's arrested for bringing Greeks too far into the temple. He was trying to appease some of the early Christian leaders about, well, you're traveling with Greeks. They're not Jewish. You need to go do this ritual purification. And he did. But then they accused him of bringing Greeks too far into the temple. Now, whether he actually did it or not is questionable. The Bible's not clear. That's in Acts chapter 21. And he was placed under house arrest until 62 CE for that. Shortly after being released, he's rearrested in 66 CE, but we don't know why. It's never explained why. But we know he was arrested 3 times. In 66, after being arrested, he would be executed. Seeing a pattern here? See, these are real cases of persecution. I'm being told I cannot exercise my religion, and it's backed up by force and punishment. Beaten, arrested, executed. That's persecution. And yet they chose to disobey, but at the same time, they accepted the consequences that went with it. Our early Christian martyrs, the Roman religion and the culture and the government were intertwined. Business, government, everyday life was intertwined with religion. They weren't separated out like they are here in the United States. Christians were considered bad citizens. They were bad citizens because they wouldn't worship the local deities. By not praying to these gods, you make these gods weaker, and they get angry, and then they turn their back on the city. And if there's any problems in the city, it's because of you, because you didn't pray. Christians were considered bad citizens. They chose Christ over Caesar. We will disobey. And what happened? They lost their businesses. People wouldn't go to them. Within the trade guilds that they served, because they would not participate in the festivities and the activities of worshiping their local guild gods, they were oftentimes kicked out of guilds. Their businesses were closed. They lost their homes, they lost their fortunes, they lost their lives. They were persecuted. See, those are the kinds of things that happen to persecuted people. And they accepted those consequences. How did they respond to this persecution? Well, Christians must always choose Christ over Caesar. Meaning that if a government official came in here and told me, you can't pray, I would go ahead and do it. You can't stop me from the exercise of my religion. If I want to have centering prayer, and I want to read the Bible, and I want to journal on it, and I want to discuss it with my friends, he can't stop that. That's the free exercise of my religion. Me stopping somebody at the door and saying, you can't come in here because you're black, is not a free exercise of my religion. See, that's discrimination. There's a big difference. Christians must always accept the consequences of their choice. That's what we do. That's what we've been instructed to do. Christians endure until the end. The end of what? The end of the worldly age and the move into the messianic age. We endure. We accept the consequences and we endure. And in the early church, part of that endurance also meant that your community rallied around you and helped you in time of need. Your business went out, then the Christian community came together and helped you. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 9 through 14, this is what Jesus said. Then they will hand you over to be tortured and will put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. When he says by my name, it's not saying the name Jesus or Yeshua, as his name would have been. It's by his name means acting like him. They're going to hate you because you act like me. Then many will fall away and they will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many people astray. And because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. That's what Christians are supposed to do. We endure till the end. We endure to the end. And this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. We endure and we testify. And people will look at us and say, look at this persecuted people. The world has thrown the worst at them, and yet they hold true to their faith. You can't say that about a lot of folks. That no matter what kind of persecution is thrown against them, they still love their neighbor. They still love their enemy. There are people marked by love. I want to be like that. That is why the early church grew so quickly. It's because the citizens of Rome looked at the Christians and said, there's something different about them. They're loving people. Wouldn't it be great if the American church were marked by love? But that's not normally what we think about when we think about the American church. We think about all the things the American church is against, all the boycotts that they have. We think about that jerk standing on a sidewalk corner with a bullhorn insulting people going by.
Deported, pal. I don't know what country you came from. I think you ought to be deported, buddy.
That's what we think about American Christianity. Or we think about these TV evangelists flying around in their private jets while people live in poverty. We're not thought about as being marked by love. Ah, yes, the culture wars. Let me just say right now, this is not persecution. In 2015, newsletters, various preachers were talking about the culture wars and how Christians were being persecuted because of the Starbucks cup of 2015. Trust me, if this is the only persecution you suffer as a Christian, you're not being persecuted. Nobody kicked down your door, arrested you in the middle of the night, dragged you off to a prison, and then beheaded you. That's what happened to our first century martyrs. The fact that you got a red Starbucks cup was not persecution. This picture here, right, shows Starbucks cups from the previous years. I got pictures of what? Little ornaments, snow, a kid on a sled with what? A dog, a cat? I can't tell what that is. It's too abstract for me. A snowman, kind of blurred out, sort of Christmassy. Maybe it's like a tree or something. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't remember when Christianity was represented by a snowman. And that by removing the snowman, you're persecuting me and taking away my religious symbols. I can't remember the last time that I went to church, instead of Advent candles on the altar, they had a kid on a sled with a cat. Oh, but we need to have something to get people all angry and riled up about. And so there it was. We're being persecuted, Christians. Be angry. We need to fundraise. Send us all your money so we can fight evil Starbucks. Let's boycott Starbucks. What I think is really funny is a lot of people decided, well, we'll go to this local coffee house down here, which is also owned by Starbucks. They just don't call it a Starbucks because they want you to go thinking that you're at a local coffee. Starbucks owns everything. You know. Right. It's like trying to boycott Disney. Disney owns everything. Or trying to boycott General Mills. They own everything. So is this persecution? Or is this your personal preference? Well, I just like having snowmen on my cup at Christmas. Is that the only reason you're angry? Because you didn't get a snowman? Wasn't Christmassy enough for you? Or is this just privilege? I want my Starbucks cup to say Merry Christmas. I want a manger scene down there. All right, so we're just going to go off on a kind of a tangent here about manger scenes. I love our manger scenes. I think they're terrific. They're completely historically inaccurate, and they don't follow religious tradition at all. The baby Jesus is not supposed to be in the manger until Christmas Day. Yet if you don't put one there, you'll have random people stop by and complain. Why isn't Jesus in the manger? Because it's not Christmas. And he's not supposed to be there. Every time I went to church, baby Jesus was there. Did you only go on Christmas? Yes. That's why. We're not supposed to have the wise men there. The wise men don't show up till the Feast of Epiphany. So basically you have the creche and Mary and Joseph. Put a few animals out there. But to appease the masses so they don't think that they're being persecuted, we put them all out there all at once. Otherwise they think, oh, you heretics. Is that just privilege, that I want it my way? Let me speak to the manager. Let me speak to the manager. I'm not getting the manger scene I want. Why is that king black? Why do you have black kings in there? Why is Darth Vader in that scene? No. Okay, that one I'll probably agree on. Or is it just manipulation? Are they just getting you angry? Are they just getting you fearful so they can manipulate you to send that money in now so they can fight this culture war? Do you ever ask them, how are you actually fighting this culture war? Oh, well, we all took a trip to Bermuda together as a ministry team and discussed it. We all took a cruise together on a nice cruise line and discussed, what can we do about this? You ever wonder what your dollars are actually doing? Besides paying some guy's salary who writes letters to you, raising money? Are you just being manipulated through fear, through anger? What color your Starbucks cup is has nothing to do with Christmas, has nothing to do with religion. All right, so religious freedom, an American invention given to us by the government, has nothing to do with the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible about it. Religious persecution, having talked about that, how do we now live this out? How should we react to this? Well, number one, I want to tell you right now, beware of those promising a Christian nation through political power. We will make this nation Christian again. Everybody will have to say Merry Christmas. We will have prayers in school. We'll get rid of abortion. They have a whole list of things of what the Christian nation is going to be like. But I say to you, beware. I warn you, beware if they ever do that. And here's the reason why. Because you, whoever you are probably not the right kind of Christian. You're not going to be white enough. You're not going to be straight enough. You're not going to belong to the right political party. And God help you if you don't believe exactly everything they believe. Because that means you are not a real Christian. And you will find yourself being persecuted. On the slide that opened this whole presentation, this whole sermon, was a picture of Joan of Arc. Who burned her at the stake? Was it the government? No, it was the church. Because she didn't believe the same way that they did. How many times has the church put people to death for heresy? You don't believe the way we believe. You're dead. And I can tell you right now, if we ever truly became, quote, a Christian nation, you're not going to be the right one. If you listen about the new apostolic revolution, which I've done sermons about before, that these apostles are going to run this country, trust me, you're not going to be one of those apostles. They're already picked. And they fight amongst themselves because there's limited space in how many apostles you can have and who's a real apostle and who's not. Because it's all about jostling for position and power. Do you really want some sect, some small group who call themselves Christians to tell you how to practice your faith? I'm sorry. You didn't completely immerse them 3 times like you're supposed to. We're shutting your church down. Would they do that? They burned heretics at the stake. Come on. Beware of those people. Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. Render unto God what is God's. That's what Jesus said. If it belongs to the government, give it to them. Obey your government. When it comes into conflict between how you practice your religion, and discriminating against somebody is not a practice of your religion. Getting together to play poker is not a practice of your religion. Getting together to smoke pot, that's not a practice of your religion unless you're a Rastafarian. And then it's very limited. There are very strict rules on that. The use of peyote in religious ceremonies is very restricted. The use of live animals in religion is very restricted. Because they're like, we need to make sure you're not just saying this. But when it comes to things like, I don't need to get my COVID shot because I have a religious exemption, it's against my religion, that's when I begin to say, I don't remember this any other time. Did you get a polio shot? Did you get a flu shot? You vaccinated against tetanus? Can you show me chapter and verse in the Bible somewhere where it says, thou shalt not get vaccinations? No, I'm not buying it. See, we do have to decide what is a legitimate and not legitimate practice of religion, and fortunately, the government's the one deciding that because Christians are too contentious to decide it for themselves, and God help us if we do. Ministry and business don't mix. You want to discriminate against a certain group? You don't want to do same-sex marriages? You don't want to have anything to do with same-sex couples? Then you start a church, and you only serve the people in that church. Now you have a ministry. You don't collect any money for it. They want to donate something, that's fine. That's your ministry, and nobody will bother you. But the moment you step outside of that, and you get that business license, the moment you step outside of that and you start charging money for it, guess what? Now you're running a business, not a ministry. And these two don't mix. I warn churches about this all the time. Be careful of those preschools. Be careful about renting your halls. If you don't want the government stepping in, don't run a business. If you enter public life, this means if you enter into your businesses, if you enter public life, you enter into maybe running for a seat on a school board, or maybe some kind of city council or something like that. If you enter public life, stay faithful. Stay faithful. You're called to faithfulness. We just finished the whole series on the book of Daniel. That's what we were told. Be holy, be faithful, and endure. But be willing to accept the consequences that come with that. If your faith truly conflicts with your public life, then you will have to accept the consequences and endure them. Let's close out this service with this benediction. Having experienced the freedom in Christ, may you go forward sharing this liberty with others. May we all seek to spread the good news of our freedom and help others to find the way to live out the freedom that Jesus has provided with us. God bless you all. Go in peace.